Welcome everybody back into NerdSesh. As always, I'm Carson Bradburn, and alongside me is Logan Camden. And we've had a little bit of a quiet week in the NBA this week. Of course, we have the NBA Cup going on, which has actually been super fun. I mean, basically all the quarterfinal games that we saw were really entertaining, and I think that that's been a very successful addition to the NBA calendar. But nevertheless, it's a very quiet week around that, so we haven't really had that many games going on. So today, we're going to zoom out, and we are going to rank our top 10 scorers in the NBA. Logan, before we get into the list itself, real quick, do you want to give a little overview of what you're valuing, what you're really considering for this list?
Yeah, so I started with guys who I trust to get their own buckets, but I also think it's an interesting balance of, in certain contexts, can they complement other guys too, right? Could they be the second fiddle alongside another ball handler? How do you complement other guys off ball? I'm really taking everything into consideration. And yeah, that's pretty much how I gauged it, how I tried to strike the balance a little bit, because I think it's deeper than just, how you impact the game with the ball in your hands. We're not just ranking the, top 10 toughest buckets, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I would also add that in particular, I really highly value how I think your scoring scales to the playoffs. In fact, that's basically what this list is for me, because
That's
we
a
do
great
have
point.
players today and throughout NBA history who are significantly more effective regular season scorers. To me, it's about when you get to that rock fight environment where you're facing more physical defenses, high level defenses, key in on taking away your greatest strengths. How do you still perform in that environment? So sort of inherently tied in with that, versatility is something that I value a good bit on this list as well. I'm just going to ask outright, Logan, did you consider Kawhi Leonard as a candidate for your list, or do you not believe Kawhi Leonard exists as a healthy basketball player?
I didn't consider Kawhi Leonard or Joel Embiid. I don't think they
Or
exist.
Embiid?
I don't. People can be upset. I am not going to consider those guys for any list for MVP. They're not
Well, of course, they're not
healthy
going to be
enough
eligible for MVP.
for any award for any. They're not healthy enough.
That's interesting. So I had Kawhi in my top 5 scorers list when we did this last year, because I think that Kawhi is kind of the epitome of the dude whose scoring arsenal scales perfectly to the playoffs, and he's consistently gotten better there and upped his volume and maintained elite efficiency. He, to me, has passed the threshold of just not being available in any sort of big moments, right? He's played 4 playoff games in the last 3+ years, and he hasn't played a single game this season. So I unfortunately did disqualify him. Embiid, however, I do have on my list because he has been healthier in postseasons, in regular seasons in recent years, and he has at least played basketball this year. So wanted to clarify that off bat. Unfortunately, I don't think that we really can have Kawhi in these conversations at this point. Let's start with your number 10 spot, Logan. Who is the last scorer on your list?
I agonized between the guy in my 10 spot and 11 spot, debating on who I should go between. I went with Devin Booker in my 10 spot, and D-Book is an interesting case because he's having a bit of a down year in terms of efficiency. He's averaging 25 points per game on 43% from the field, just 34% from behind the arc, and 58% true shooting. But Book is a guy that really has a complete scoring skill set where he can score from all 3 levels. He can score with the ball in his hands, off ball, around screens, as a spot up guy. And that's why I thought Book ultimately had to make my list, because of how good of a complementary scorer he is, as well as a guy with the ball in his hands, right? He's a 96th percentile post-up scorer this year, and that's a real big advantage that I think Devin Booker has too, especially when compared to my guy in my number 11 spot. And I guess I'll spoil it. I have Kyrie Irving in my 11 spot, and Kyrie was a really tough omission because Kyrie's been good in the playoffs, and he was really good last year anytime Dallas needed him to step up. But Book is a little bit bigger, and they're so similar to me. But just because of Kyrie's getting a little bit older, and because I think that Book is so big, I went with him. But the reason that he's not higher on this list is because I think he lacks those elite physical traits that can just help him overtake, really get him easy shots and really take over games. That speed, the burst, the strength. There are just other guys on this list that I like those physical traits from them more. But Book really has a complete scoring skill set, and that's why I thought he had to make the list. Because again, I'm not just considering what you can do on ball. Book can coexist as a number two and just within the flow of the offense. So that's why he's here for me. And if he was more efficient, I think Book might have a case to be even higher on this list. But right now, with how he's playing, I got him at number 10.
I have Book at number 10 as well. It's really interesting to me that Kyrie was the first guy off who you mentioned, though. I wouldn't have him quite that high. And obviously, like, if we're talking aesthetics, he's got a case to be number one in the NBA today. He's an absolute artist. I just think the big difference between him and Book is they are both incredible, difficult shot makers, incredibly skilled jump shooters. But the difference is the size that you mentioned and also the ability to manufacture easy offense by getting to the line, because neither of these guys are those traditional quick downhill advantage creators, but Book is bigger, he's stronger, and he gets to the line like 7 times a game. So that's where, even though you mentioned the field goal percentages are down this year, his true shooting percentage, 58. That's okay, right? It's not where you want him to be, but for how slow of a three-point shooting start he's gotten off to, that's not a bad spot to be, and that to me is the baseline that he gets with his ability to get to the line, whereas Kyrie, at the end of the day, like, he had some high highs in the playoffs last year, but he's really volatile, and I thought that he was just absolutely horrible in that Boston series when you put him up against an elite perimeter defense, and I'm not saying that he didn't also torch a really good perimeter defense in Minnesota. It's just, I do think there's a lot of variance with Kyrie because he's so solely dependent on that difficult shot making. Book, I think you have a little bit of a higher floor. But compared to the guys who are higher than him, yeah, those dudes do have more of an ability to create real advantages to get all the way downhill. And maybe some of them also are better high volume 3-point shooters. Because the thing with Book is he does live on a pretty tough shot diet. And particularly, he lives out of the mid-range a lot. Now, he's an incredible mid-range shooter. He's 50% from mid-range this season and consistently hovers around that mark. And that is a huge foundation of what makes him such a great scorer. And to me, he's the most versatile scoring guard on the planet because he is such an unbelievable jump shooter from mid-range, also really good from beyond the arc because of the ability to post up and kill you, to get to his own shot out of pick and roll, out of isolation. He's an elite off-ball scorer, which, as you mentioned, I think makes him an excellent number 2 scorer, if that's what you're asking of him. And he is an excellent foul drawer, so that does give him a higher floor than, again, a guy like Kyrie. So I just think he's got the body of work in terms of production over the last few years where we don't have to overreact to him having a not great 20-game stretch, which, again, is still 25 points per game on 58% true shooting, because the previous 2 regular seasons, he's 27.5 a night on 61% true shooting. Over the last 3 postseasons, he's almost 29 points per game on 65% true shooting. That's great production, and that's really good efficiency, too. His limitation is, though, that lack of high-end athleticism, and I think where we saw that most recently and most glaringly in the playoffs was against Minnesota, where at times he's struggling to handle the ball comfortably, right, against just those crazy feisty perimeter defenders applying full court pressure, and he's struggling to get a step on those guys. He ends up exploding in game 4, so his production from that series still looks solid, but games 1 through 3 was a struggle, and he has the ability to do what he did in game 4 no matter what level of defense you're playing, and that does make him special. And the year before that, I mean, he had a historically great scoring playoff run, so I land with Book at number 10. I do love the off-ball ability. I love the versatility. I love the pure shot making, but there are dudes who make their own lives easier, and I'm going to take those guys over Devin Booker at this point because I feel like we have seen against Minnesota and early in this regular season some of his limitations and how they can limit him just a bit. Okay, who do you have in that 9 spot, Logan?
One of those guys that I think has better physical tools than him, and that's why he's above him, is Jayson Tatum, and he's going to come in at my number 9 spot.
Wow.
Now, I think Tatum has a lower floor than Devin Booker because we've seen Tatum settle for threes, and we've seen him have catastrophically bad performances where he's not hitting anything. And it normally doesn't come back to bite the Boston Celtics when Jayson Tatum has a bad game because they have so much aggregate talent. So you can afford Tatum to have an off night more than some of these other superstars because of all of the ability in Boston. That being said, I think Tatum probably has a higher ceiling than D-Book because of his affinity to get hot from behind the arc. And I also do like his physical traits better. We've seen Tatum get stronger and develop more of a post game over these past 2 seasons. We've seen Tatum get downhill more. Now, this year, he's actually taking, I think, 45% of his shots from behind the arc or something ridiculous. I think it's his career high.
50.
It's insane. But Tatum can just impose himself a little bit more than Devin Booker physically, and that's why I prefer him mostly is I do trust him to get to the cup more. I do trust Tatum to draw fouls and get to the line at a similar level to Devin Booker too. And like D-Book, I also think that he has a really good complementary scoring skill set alongside other guys, not just what he can do with the ball in his hands. I think Tatum's a good cutter when he commits to it. I think he's a really good spot-up player, and with all the stuff that he can do on ball. The reason that Tatum's this low is because I do think there is some volatility with Tatum that you don't get with some of the other guys that are higher on this list, right? Like I said, Tatum can disappear in games sometimes. He can get really happy with the pull-up three and stuff like that and completely disappear. But I was confident he would return to form after that abysmal playoffs last year, and I really think Tatum has answered in a big way. There are guys I just trust more, though. And there are guys with worse physicals than Tatum higher on this list. There are guys with but I think most of these guys have higher ceilings. And even though they may not have the physicals, I just trust them a little bit more in a playoff setting than Jayson Tatum. But I think Tatum's bounced back in a pretty big way this season.
So I have Jayson Tatum just off my list. I actually do prefer Book as a scorer to him purely. And I do think the shot making is a real factor there, right? I think both of these dudes, when it comes down to it, often do live on very jump shot heavy diets, and they do get to the line at similar rates. And when it comes down to that, I just think Book is clearly a better jump shooter, and we've seen that scale, and he's more versatile in terms of how he can get to his spots, right? Utilizing the mid-range at a really high level, not just relying on pull-up sidestep threes as we can see happen with Tatum. And I do think Book is a significantly better off-ball player, in my opinion. I mean, Tatum certainly has the ability to knock down catch-and-shoot jumpers at actually a really high clip, but I'm talking more about the totality of moving, right, being able to curl around a screen and get to a mid-range jumper or attack off the catch in those spots. Those are the things that Book does a lot in his scoring arsenal that we don't see in nearly as much from Jayson Tatum, who, again, is a great catch-and-shooter, but I'm talking about the totality of your off-ball play. I prefer Book in those ways, and I do think that Book's game has scaled better to the postseason. Playoffs since 2022, Jayson Tatum, under 26 points per game. The volume production isn't bad, but on just over 56% true shooting, I don't think we can overlook how erratic he's been there. He got off to an amazing scoring start to this year, but he has cooled down since. And I still think you do get some of the volatility with the pull-up shooting with him and just some frustrating shot selection at times. So I absolutely think he's in these conversations because the ceiling with him is incredibly high, right? When he is fully maximizing his physical advantages and getting downhill and bullying people out of the post, attacking mismatches, and he's knocking down his jumpers, both pulling up and off the catch. That's a dude who can give anybody nightmares. But even though Book doesn't have the most physical advantages, he's been more consistent. He's been more efficient. He's scored with higher volume in those playoff environments specifically, and I'm going to lean on him for that reason.
I just like Tatum's physicals more, and both of these guys are kind of erratic. And I don't know, maybe both of these guys kind of left a sour taste in my mouth after the last playoff run because Book really got bottled up by Minnesota, and then Tatum just completely fell apart for the entire run. He couldn't hit a jump shot.
Right.
It bled into the Olympics. So
that's a lower low as a scorer.
I agree.
Absolutely, than we've seen from anybody who we're going to talk about on this list. Well,
I completely
maybe one
agree.
Exception. But definitely a lower low than we've seen even from Book. And Book has had some postseason runs that weren't super pretty like last year.
Well,
but
especially
that was an extended 20-plus
games.
Yeah, but that's such a small sample size. That's like a handful of games in his career. But Tatum, it was 20-plus games in the postseason last year when he really struggled as a scorer. I know that Celtics fans are going to be mad. I think Jayson Tatum right now is the fifth best player in basketball. I think he's a top 5 player. But that's because of his incredible versatility and his growth as a playmaker and his defensive versatility, what he does on the glass, right? He is the ultimate all-around player in the NBA today. As a pure scorer, I think he's just outside the top 10.
So I've got battle scars with both these guys, but I do prefer Tatum's physicality. I just think he can do things that Book can't with his strength against bigger defenders and ball handlers. I like how he can get to the cup. I just value Tatum's physicals a little bit more than Book, and that's why I gave him the edge.
All right, well, at my number 9, I have a dude who I think also creates more physical advantage than Devin Booker. In fact, I think creates more physical advantages for himself as a scorer than both of the guys we're talking about. I have Anthony Edwards in my number 9 spot, and I think this guy has taken a leap after being one of the least efficient pull-up shooters in basketball for each of the last few regular seasons. He is now averaging the most points per game in basketball off of pull-ups, with 83rd percentile efficiency on jumpers off the dribble. Now, do I think he's going to maintain that sort of elite efficiency? I don't, but I also didn't think he would still be shooting almost 43% from deep this far into the season. And wherever he lands, he's clearly improved by a good bit compared to previous seasons. What's really interesting about Anthony Edwards is you think of him, right, as this elite slasher downhill guard. He's got the lowest 2-point percentage of anybody on my list, just 48% on twos. I do ultimately, though, have a level of faith in his ability to get to the rim and finish in traffic when he needs to. And I think that's where he's really special when it comes to just using his athleticism to finish in those packed paints. He's consistently been so good. I'll tell you another guy who I really, really considered in this mix alongside Book and Tatum, who I was comparing to Ant. Donovan Mitchell, because I think that Donovan Mitchell belongs in these conversations, and I think that he and Ant have a lot of similarities in that they're both very high-volume three-point shooters. Now Ant has joined that club, and they're both good at it, but haven't consistently been great at it over the course of their careers, so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but they're super effective drivers and finishers in traffic, and it's like when they get in the mindset of, I'm just going to get downhill, you feel like there's nothing you can do to stop those guys. You think about what Mitchell did against Orlando, right? I mean, just his footwork, his body control in the paint, his finishing, it's some of the best in basketball. His ball handling is so phenomenal. The reasons that I go Ant over Donovan Mitchell purely as scorers, A, strength. I think that Ant's strength is a real advantage in these playoff environments, right? His ability to go through people or his ability to create separation with his strength for his mid-range game, which I think is another advantage that he does have over Donovan Mitchell. I slightly prefer him there. He put on some real mid-range clinics in the postseason last year, and he hasn't had as low of lows as Donovan Mitchell has in the postseason, where he totally falls in love with the three ball and he goes ice cold. Mitchell has had this totally polarized playoff scoring experience where he's got like 3 incredible runs and then he's got 2 absolute clunker runs. Ant's been consistent, man. And in previous runs, you could have said, oh, well, this is outlier jump shooting from him. But now that he's shooting at this level in the regular season, when this guy's also giving you 28 points per game on 60% true shooting in the postseason, I think I trust him more than all the guys who we've talked about. I trust him more than Book. I trust him more than Tatum. I trust him more than Donovan Mitchell as a scorer. Bottom line, when you have this sort of athlete who is shooting at this level, like, that just scares the absolute shit out of me if I'm on the opposite side. And when he is shooting like this, I mean, he's effectively unguardable.
I'm not to toot my own horn. I did say that last year during Ant's playoff run. I was trying to. I know you push back against it, but like Anthony Edwards, you see it in practice highlights when you look at him from Team USA to when he's in Minnesota.
Practice.
This has been a main focus of Anthony Edwards for a while, and that's why I expected to see a leap this season. I have both of those guys on my list. I have Donovan Mitchell higher, and I also have Anthony Edwards higher on this list. So it's interesting to me that you bring those guys up. So I assume that we're going to have some guys that aren't on my list that are higher on yours. I have Anthony Edwards all the way up at number 6, and for a lot of the reasons that you laid out. Like, when we're talking about these playoff environments, I want a guy who can just explode past whoever's in front of him on ball and get to the rim. And again, when he's shooting like this, he is creating the 2 most efficient looks in basketball so easily. And I think Edwards and Mitchell are an interesting comp, Carson, because I think both are in some ways limited by their offensive scheme and the personnel that are around them, right? I think that Mitchell, if Mitchell was alongside Rudy Gobert for the longest time in Utah, right? Anthony Edwards is now dealing with that in Minnesota. Now Donovan Mitchell has Jared Allen.
Some sort of survivor support group, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to need one, man. I just think, like you see how Jalen Brunson has improved, right, with Karl Anthony Towns alongside the 5, and obviously that's like an offensive haven, right? It's a utopia with all that space to go and work. I feel like Mitchell and Edwards would look better in offensive situations like that, and so in a lot of ways, I feel like we Not that they're not in bad offensive situations, but they're not maximized. And both of these guys, really good pull-up shooters, can get hot and go on these crazy runs, and they're freak athletes. And that's why they're higher for me on the list. And Ant, I am just continuing to stockpile stock with Ant. I think Ant is going to be one of the best players in the league one day. I've been saying that for a few years now. I don't think it's a hot take. I mean, Ant is such a specimen. And now that the pull-up jump shooting is being realized, I do still think he needs to strike that balance more, because it is frustrating to me. And I get it, man. When the shot's falling and it's there for you, you just want to pull it. Late in games, I'd like to see Ant exercise a little bit of restraint. But it is impressive. As you mentioned, 12.3 pull-up points per game. Number one in the league. 42% on pull-ups overall. 43% on pull-up threes. And he's a 95th percentile spot-up guy. Carson, he's top 10 in pick-and-roll points per game and isolation points per game. He's got some of the best physical traits on this list. And now that the pull-up jump shooting's come along, I think Ant's a total package. When we're talking about playoff settings, there's only 5 guys that I want more than Ant.
Well, listen, that doesn't surprise me coming from you, because you are a huge Ant guy. I mean, the other day when we had Tyler Hoop Venue on, you said you would take Ant over SGA, and I just about had an aneurysm. But I can see the case. And I understand what you're talking about with situation being a negative factor for him, right? Making his life more difficult as a scorer. Nevertheless, even though the spacing isn't great, I would like to see him get all the way downhill a bit more, because right now
you do think that plays a little bit of a factor,
absolutely,
though, right?
No, absolutely. But I'm just saying, I think that we can acknowledge that there are multiple factors at play. His situation is basically enticing him to settle for these pull-ups more, but also there is a level at which I would like to see him just will himself to the rim. And I do trust in his ability to do that in the big moments, right? I mean, I think that we saw it in the postseason last year. He was getting downhill quite consistently and pairing that with the pull-up shooting. But this regular season, only 15% of his shots are coming inside of 3 feet, which is low for an athlete of his caliber, quite low. And like I said, he's got the lowest 2-point percentage of anybody on my list. But I believe in him making the right decisions as a scorer and being more physically assertive in those high leverage moments, and that's why I have him up at number 9. At number 8, Logan, I really considered putting Ant above this guy, but there is just a level of faith who I have in my number 8 where I'm going to still have him in this spot. I have Steph Curry, and Steph's raw numbers this regular season aren't going to blow you away, right? 23 points per game. But the efficiency is still really good, 62% true shooting. And with the minutes restriction he was on early in the year, and with the super deep rotation the Warriors have been thrown out there, he's only playing just over 30 minutes a game. So per 36 minutes, he's giving you 27 points. So on a per minute basis, he's still outproducing an Anthony Edwards, and he's doing it more efficiently. Now, I do think we've seen him take a bit of a step back. He hasn't been as efficient as a pick and roll scorer over the last 2 years. He's off to a slow start in terms of his isolation efficiency this year. He doesn't get to the rim very much at all at this stage in his career, but he still has what is right up there for the most special scoring weapon in the planet with his 3-point shooting and his jump shooting overall. And he's over 51% from the mid-range this year. He's over 41% from 3. He's been on a little bit of a slump as of late, but you have to remember what he did to Boston and OKC and Dallas just a month ago, where he just assassinated those teams with unbelievable displays of jump shooting, especially in the clutch. I'm still going to bet on that, man. I mean, that's Steph Curry who we're talking about. And his overall offensive impact is out of this world. And I think you could say makes him probably like one of the 3 most impactful offensive players. That's not just pure scoring because of his off-ball gravity, which is a huge part of it. But we mentioned the other day, I mean, the Warriors have like a 122 offensive rating with him on the floor and a 102 offensive rating with him off it. They're a complete disaster outside of Steph Curry, but he alone has made them a very good offense when he's on the court. And he's still very efficient as a scorer, and he's shown that takeover ability in big spots. Just hasn't been the most consistent. But last year, even though he took the step back after the All-Star break, and I think he got worn down, still on the year as a whole, he gave you 26 a night on 62% true shooting. Last 2 postseasons that we've seen him in, I get it. We haven't seen him in the playoffs since 2023, but he was super impressive. And when we're talking about bad offensive situations, it doesn't get worse. It does not get worse than the offensive situation that Steph is in, just in terms of the complete lack of creation alongside him. The fact that he's often playing in lineups where you have Draymond and a non-shooting big on the floor. That's really hard. So I would need to see more evidence of a drop before I put Steph lower. But I'm starting to wonder, Logan, if you have him off your list, because there's only so many names you can have in a top 10. If I'm not mistaken, you can only have 10 names.
The situation's a good point. I don't have Steph on my list.
Wow.
It's more of a... And I want to be clear about something when I say this. I agree with you about the overall offensive impact. If I was just going off of... And that's the balance that I'm having trouble figuring out how to strike here, because I do have Donovan Mitchell on my list, and I think that Steph... even greater than these guys, but like a Book, like a Kevin Durant, Steph would scale so well, even if he was like a complimentary guy. That's how he produces a lot of his offense, right, without the ball in his hands. And he is in an offensive hellscape, but there's other guys that physically I want more with their tools and how they can get downhill a little bit more than Steph at this point in his career, and Steph was really hard to rank. I had him as like the third guy off my list. And
wow. That's surprising to me.
It's not offensive impact because, again, I think the gravity that Steph has is insane. It's one of the highest of all time. And the situation part, you make a good argument, man. That's making me kind of rethink if I should have Steph here, because it's a shit show.
Yeah, and also, I will say, I really, really like Donovan Mitchell, but, like, the volatility with him is real. And again, last year in the playoffs, we saw the great version of it. But overall in the playoffs since 2022, his last 3 runs, he's just under 27 a night. The volume is there, but
I mean, he can just 54.6%
true shooting. He can take over. So can Steph Curry, though. Steph Curry's last 2 postseasons, he was 28.5 a night on 60% true shooting.
My thing with Steph is he is, and I know he's the greatest shooter of all time, he is just so reliant on the perimeter shot diet, where I know Donovan can get to the rim at will. Steph just can't do that. But Donovan ends up taking as
many threes as Steph in the playoffs and the regular season, damn near.
I cut Mitchell some slack, though, because, I mean, it's like, well, when Garland is shitting his pants and Evan Mobley is limited and Jared Allen's not out there, it's like, I kind of empathize with Mitchell just hucking shots at a point because he's the only guy getting buckets.
I understand that, but Steph is the greatest shooter of all time. So, like, to me, his specific dependence on that matters when you get into higher conversations than Donovan Mitchell. And that's no disrespect to Donovan Mitchell whatsoever. That is giving respect to Steph Curry and what we've seen him do consistently in recent years. And, like, again, per minute, the volume and efficiency is still incredible this year.
Another argument in his favor is I think Donovan Mitchell is the least malleable scorer on this list.
I would agree.
That was also the balance I was trying to strike with Donovan, is because I don't think he scales as well as anybody on this list. Even I have Jalen Brunson on my list. Even a Jalen Brunson, right?
Actually, I think that he probably... Well, it depends on how you define malleable. On ball, who's more versatile? Absolutely Brunson. Who has more off ball value?
I think Brunson's
off ball you can tap into.
I think Brunson's off ball value is improved now that they've got Cat. Like, I think they're utilizing him more off screens. He's shooting them now. Like, I think I probably think Brunson scales better alongside other guys offensively, and I think it's just a mindset thing. Like, Brunson's willing to do that stuff where Mitchell sometimes isn't.
Sure.
And dude, I'm sorry. This was the toughest dilemma that I had, but it was the toughest decision I made. I ultimately left Steph off.
Bro, apologize to me for leaving Steph off.
I know you love him, man. It's your baby boy.
Accepted. Well, I mean, dude, Steph Curry, for God's sakes. I don't know. I need to see more before I have him lower on this list. And I am glad that you brought up the off-ball scoring aspect, because obviously that's where Steph is going to be better than literally everybody else on this list. And that actually caused me to debate the Book versus Ant spot, because I do think that Book is so much better as an off-ball scorer than an Anthony Edwards. And I really, really do appreciate guys who have that sort of versatility to their game. All right, so number 7, who you got, Logan?
Well, so I actually, my number 8 is Jalen Brunson.
Okay.
I didn't get to him yet. So I've got Brunson here at 8, and in comparison to other guys on my list, in comparison to a Steph Curry, I just think Brunson can get to a variety of different looks on the floor. And a part of that is because of Steph's defensive attention, because I think that also factors in. You talk about the scheme. That's what makes Steph so hard to gauge. But I trust Brunson's, like, how methodical he is. And when I look at a Tatum or a D-Book, I just think he can work and get to his looks more reliably and better than those guys. He's not settling. Jalen Brunson never settles. And now with this newfound space, you're seeing him thrive even more. He's top 10 in pull-up points per game. He's shooting 45% on pull-ups in general. He's shooting 41% on pull-up threes. He's also top 10 in scoring and among pick-and-roll ball handlers. He's great out of isolation. And like I mentioned earlier, I think we're seeing him tap more into that off-ball kind of value where he's coming off screens and he's relocating and moving to open space and willingly pulling and making shots. I think we're seeing the off-ball version of Brunson kind of unlocked this year with all the supporting pieces that they have now. But he's one of the best on-ball guys in the league to me. He is always working downhill. He is always hunting his shots. He can work back to the basket when he gets inside the arc. Brunson is just going to work to get to his looks in a way that I think Tatum can settle sometimes. I think Book can settle sometimes. Brunson never really does that, and that's why I prefer him. I think those guys have better physicals, and they're probably better off-ball complementary scorers, but Brunson on ball, I know what I'm getting, and he's so reliable. And when we're talking about those playoff settings, I want that guy. I know what Brunson's going to do in the playoffs, right? Like that 25, he may get it a little less efficiently in the playoffs, but he's going to give me that steady 25 every night. He can just impose his will, and that's why Brunson's on my list.
I have Jalen Brunson at number 7, so we're very close on this. This year, he's giving you 25 a night. He's doing it on career best 62% true shooting, and he just has one of the highest floors as a scorer of anybody in the NBA because he is so constantly playing at his own pace, because he is so incredibly effective in terms of carving his way to his spots, if that's from the mid-range, if that's from floater range, where he's as good, if not better, than any guard in basketball. And his ability to do that, even in really tough offensive environments, is so valuable to me. And that is something that sets him apart as a scorer from somebody like a Jayson Tatum, who obviously has way more physical advantages, right? Brunson is strong, but he probably has fewer physical advantages than anybody on this list. I mean, Steph would really be the only guy who's in that same conversation. But another thing that I do think matters with Tatum, especially when you look at efficiency, is, well, he's been less efficient than everybody who we're talking about today in the postseason while in offensive utopia. Jalen Brunson was in brutal offensive situations the last 2 postseasons, right? Julius Randle was inept in the spot-up shooting, was awful 2 years ago, and then last year, Randle was hurt, and then OG got hurt, right? There were no other creators on the floor, and over the last 2 playoffs, he's given you 30 a night on 56% true shooting. Not great efficiency, but consider the situation there, and consider the fact that, like, the burden of every grenade or every late shot clock, hey, we just need you to go create something, that falls on Brunson every time. Just, hey, get a shot up on the rim, and we're a great offensive rebounding team, and, like, we like our chances there. He was in such a unique situation that, to me, the efficiency, although it is partly a product of the fact that he doesn't create advantages like some of these other guys, it's also absolutely crucial that you note the situation and what was expected of him in terms of volume, and also just his conditioning. The fact that he doesn't wear down, that he can bear that sort of volume, like, that's a rare thing from a scorer as well. So I'm super high on the guy. And the biggest thing to me is just his mastery out of pick and roll. He's a 92nd percentile pick and roll scorer, but he's also an 80th percentile isolation scorer. I mean, just changes pace so nicely. And it's that dominance of the intermediate area that's ridiculous. He shoots 52% inside the paint, outside the restricted area, but over the last couple years has also been able to ramp up his three-point volume and do so at elite efficiency. In the regular season, I mean, he's shooting 43% from deep this year, and that's another thing about Brunson. He is a very ball-dominant player, but he's a 99th percentile spot-up player in terms of efficiency. And last year, it was basically the same thing. I mean, he's incredibly effective off the catch, And he's lethal as a pull-up shooter. He's got an effective field goal percentage over 55 on pull-up jumpers. That's an elite number. He's got 86th percentile efficiency as a jump shooter off the dribble. And like Devin Booker, isn't a guy who, again, has those sort of A-plus athletic traits where you think, oh, he's willing himself to the rim, and so he's getting to the line a bunch. But he does get to the line at a very good rate, and that does give him a nice baseline as a scorer, too. So he's just one of those dudes who has a crazy high offensive floor. Ironically, he just had one of his worst offensive games, scoring games of the last couple years, because Dyson Daniels had that man in hell. Dyson Daniels is something special, but we've seen Brunson do it in the regular season. We've seen him do it in the postseason with crazy volume. Now that he's in a better offensive situation, we're seeing him do it with borderline elite efficiency. I do trust him more as a scorer than all the other guys who we've talked about. I think on ball, he just has such an incredibly versatile array of ways to get to his spots and to create buckets for his offense. So that's why I have him at number 7.
It's a good case, and I went back and forth a lot with between Brunson and my number 7, Donovan Mitchell. Here's the thing. I think that Brunson clearly has a higher floor than Donovan Mitchell just because, again, of how methodical he is. But Donovan Mitchell's ceiling is so high to me, and that's why he is so high on this list, because he can manufacture those looks at the rim really easy with his athletic traits. He can manufacture pull-up threes and get hot and knock them down. And just, I think Mitchell's greatest punch is better than Brunson. And I think you can say that about probably Tatum and Devin Booker as well. Mm-hmm. But again, it's those physical tools that Mitchell has, that burst, the athleticism. That's why he's above those other guys. But I understand you leaving him off this list because, like I said, when you're looking at the complementary scoring skill set and the volatility, Mitchell is probably the most volatile guy on this list, either him or Tatum. And I know you don't have Tatum or Mitchell here, so that makes sense. And then, again, when you're looking at these guys scaling alongside other superstars or other ball-dominant guys, I think he probably has the lowest value of anybody. But, again, I really value his ceiling. I really value the pull-up jump shooting, how hot he can get from there, and the physical tools. So I've always floated in between Booker and Mitchell, and it's always an interesting case. I'm officially planting my flag, and I'm on Team Donovan.
It's interesting. We've had this conversation numerous times before, and I don't disagree that Donovan Mitchell has a higher ceiling. I just think he has a significantly lower floor. I think that there's a greater gap in terms of the floor than the ceiling because, I mean, obviously we've seen Brunson explode offensively in his own right. And I think when we're talking about a lot of these individual scoring conversations, especially if they're two dudes who are overwhelmingly on-ball players, I think I want the dude who individually has the higher floor, who I do think is more consistent, because especially in the playoffs, man, that's what matters, right? It's not a pure numbers game in terms of, oh, well, this shot at the rim is worth X amount of points per possession. This pull-up three is worth X number of points per possession. It comes down to how consistently can you get yourself to a good shot? You might not get to those great shots, right? And Jalen Brunson gets himself to a good shot so consistently, and especially in clutch situations, that's extremely valuable to me. When you're in these rock fight environments, I think that Jalen Brunson just shines, and he's so resilient, right? This is something that we were actually just talking about recently with Mars when we were doing our top 10 peaks of the century, and we were talking about on our top 10 peaks ever with Akeem Olajuwon, these guys who in the regular season live on tough shot diets can maintain their efficiency and even up their volume against better defenses in the playoffs because they're taking and making the same shots that they're always used to. And in the playoffs now, those are the shots that are available. And to me, Jalen Brunson is like the definition of one of those dudes. He's a tough shot taker, tough shot maker, but he's so great at it and he's so under control and he's so physically equipped for the playoffs in terms of his strength that he's a guy who I just believe in deeply there, and I do trust him more than a Donovan Mitchell.
He's one of the most reliable guys, I'd say,
absolutely.
On this list. Like, again, I think with his lack of physical abilities and the ceiling, right, he's one of the most reliable guys on this list, though. Like, if we were doing that, he might be top 5, actually.
Yeah, in terms of scoring floor,
yeah.
I absolutely think that he probably would be. And last year, the volume was just something we very rarely seen from a guard in playoff
And they
history.
needed it. They needed it every night.
They absolutely needed it. They needed it so much.
It
And I'm
was-
excited to see how efficient he can continue to
Yeah.
be now that he's in such a
And-
great offensive situation compared to such a terrible one.
I know you made this comp. I think Tyler Hoopven, you might have made it too last year, but the Allen Iverson kind of comp was interesting, right? The defensive-oriented team, you need your number one to step up. It really was on that level, and I'm ecstatic. I think the Knicks are going to be an elite playoff offense this year, and I think Brunson and Cat both are going to thrive.
I mean, they're just a ridiculous offense, period. And by the way, I really considered Karl Anthony Towns for this list.
He was he was one of the first 5 guys where when I was going through all the pages of like advanced play types, and I'm like, damn, man.
He's just absurd. I mean, he's absolutely absurd. He was one of my first 3 guys off. We'll get to honorable mentions after. We don't need to do this thing now, but Cat has been so great this year, and as a pure scorer is in these conversations when we're talking about the top 10. My number 6, I have Kevin Durant. And I considered putting KD one spot higher than this because he's one of the greatest scorers of all time. I mean, to me, a top 2 scorer of all time. He's obviously not at his apex, but the guy is still unbelievable. This year, giving you 26 a night on 65% true shooting has been incredible in the clutch. The Suns have an 8-0 clutch record when he plays. He's averaged 4.4 clutch points per game on 63% shooting from the field, just raw field goal percentage. It's unbelievable, and his superpower is the same thing that it's always been, right? The guy is near 7 foot. He handles like a guard, and he can shoot over anybody at will as one of the greatest jump shooters the game has ever seen. And he also has incredible versatility because of his shooting value as a spot-up player, right? He's another one of those dudes who is incredibly valuable on and off ball and really just would be like one of the ultimate plug-and-play all-time greats into any offense in NBA history. We've seen that. He's been efficient out of isolation. He's been efficient out of pick and roll. He's been relatively efficient as a post-up player. Like, the dude has just been an incredibly efficient monster. And he is getting to the rim a bit more this year. And his playoff resume in recent years, it's been something of a mixed bag. But you look at the bottom line production since 2022, and he's giving you 28 a night on 59% true shooting. And you think about some of the bumps in the road there, right? You think about how rough the 2022 series was against Boston, right? When they were just playing hyper physical wing defense on him with the great defensive wing personnel that they had with Tatum and Brown and company. And you think about the fact that I think KD's series against Denver from 2023 kind of gets overrated because people like lump it in and they're like, oh, Book and KD were out of this world. It was way more Book. Like, I think KD shot 46% from the field, 22% from 3 in that series, and also struggled some with a very physical wing defender in Aaron Gordon in that series. That's the one limitation that he has to me when we have seen him go up against those really physical, strong, athletic wing defenders. And just the fact that he's not nearly the rim pressure he used to be, and he's not the rim pressure that some of these other great scoring wings or just great scorers, period, are. That's the only thing that holds me back from KD being in the top 5. But again, look at the production he's carved out in spite of those limitations. That's why I couldn't have him any lower than this. It's the most wonderful time of the year for getting in on all the hoops, football, and hockey action at DraftKings Sportsbook.
In the season of giving, we're being gifted college football and basketball, pro football and basketball, and pro hockey too, almost 24/7. So many games every day, so many opportunities to place your first bet. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and place your bet.
And here's a gift for all new customers. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Happy holidays from DraftKings. The crown is yours.
I do have KD a few spots higher, and
A few? Oh.
not many. He's my number 4 guy.
Okay.
At number 5, another one of the hardest guys, in my opinion, to rank on this list. I have Giannis, and the only reason Giannis is at number 5, because I think I'd hear an argument, honestly, for Giannis all the way up to number 2. I can't have a guy that's this limited as a shot creator at the end of games any higher on my list, in my opinion. And to the guys I have above him, KD has been elite in clutch games. He's got 4.4 clutch points per game on 63% from the field. The Suns are 8-0 in those games. He's been awesome. I have Luka higher almost out of respect for him, even though this has been a really bad year. And Giannis just doesn't have that limitation. But this is the best, I think, offensive version we've ever seen of Giannis in totality. I think this is arguably the best scoring version of Giannis purely when you factor in the fact that he has almost completely eliminated three-pointers from his shot diet. He's attempting less than one a game. He's expanded his mid-range game. He's also, by far, in my opinion, the best transition scorer in basketball. He's averaging 8.5 transition points per game. Carson, he's top 10 in isolation points per game, transition points per game, post points per game, and cutting points per game.
Insane.
He's top 5 in isolation, transition, and post-up volume for all of those. And he's also been super efficient as a scorer out of pick and roll with the ball in his hands too, right? Just give him a screen and a little bit of space and he can get to the rim at will. He's the most dominant force in the league that we've seen since Shaq. And he's also averaging 33 points per game on 63% true shooting. Like, Giannis is ridiculous right now. It's literally, and I think this gets overblown sometimes, and I think he's gotten better, again, with cutting out threes and making mid-range jumpers. The only reason he can't be higher is I just think ball in his hands at the end of a game, I wouldn't go to him. I'd put it in somebody else's hands. Luckily, the Bucks have a guy like that. They have Damian Lillard. I also think Giannis has significant complementary scoring value too, though, when you think about what he can do in transition, just getting out on the break as a cutter, what he can do as a roll man, where I honestly think the Milwaukee Bucks should utilize him even more, just screening and rolling. But it is that late game shot creation. And again, I think he can get overblown sometimes, but that's the only reason he's not higher, because everybody else that is higher on my list, I can go to late in the game, and I trust them to go hunt and find their shot.
I don't think you're giving Giannis enough credit for his development this year in terms of skill. I have Giannis at number 4, and when we're talking about my top 3 guys in terms of the half-court mastery, in terms of the combination of their ability to generate really high-value shots for themselves in and around the rim, but then also to dominate you with jump shooting, right? Those guys, yeah, I'll give the edge over Giannis, even though Giannis's production this regular season has been the craziest in basketball, basically. Versus KD, though, man, I just think the floor is too low with this version of KD. I still think that he's awesome, but again, I think that we've seen him struggle in certain matchups with his extreme reliance at times on that difficult shot making. And this is a different Giannis in the half court. In fact, Giannis has been more efficient individually on half court possessions this season than Kevin Durant has been. You mentioned the volume he's producing with as an isolation scorer, and the efficiency as a pick and roll scorer, and the volume as a post-up scorer. The big thing to me is just he's taking better shots than ever before, and he's a better shot maker than ever before, significantly better. I mean, this season he's 45% from mid-range. Last season he was 35%, and there's just a totally different level of comfort and confidence in him rising up and taking these shots, and that includes right in some big spots. It's a weapon he's never had in his career. He's 42% on shots inside the paint, outside the restricted area. Last year, that was down at 37%. That's not a good number per se, but for Giannis, it's quite a good number. And as you said, he doesn't take threes anymore. He's taking 0.8 threes per game. So great. That's 3 or 4 possessions a game that a few years ago he was just wasting, that now he's not. So 60% of his shots are coming in the restricted area, and he makes 74% of them. He's the best downhill weapon, restricted area scorer in the NBA today. So I just think he's taken a real leap as a scorer and an offensive player. I actually think, even though he's not the same defender he was a few years ago, he's still very, very good there, and actually has been quite good as of late, especially. He's had some really great defensive performances. This is, to me, the best Giannis that we've ever seen. And I just talked about where would his peak rank all time. I did a TikTok on it, and just to be fair to everybody else, we were only using multiple year peaks, so I don't think that we can call this based off of 20-something games like a peak compared to some of those other guys, because we would need a bigger sample. But this is the version of Giannis that I would want more than any other, because I think he's that much better offensively than he's ever been. Again, my top 3 all are clearly superior half-court scorers. That is the most valuable thing to me. But Giannis's floor as a scorer is just too high right now. He's too dominant physically when he also has this sort of skill to complement that he's never had before for me to have him any lower than my 4 spot.
I hear that argument. And I was just going to add, you were talking about the mid-range point. Because of how dominant Giannis is as a downhill threat, the defense will concede that jump shot to him every single time. So he's hitting it at a 45% clip. Every single one of those he takes. Giannis basically has time to sit there, clip his toenails, clip his fingernails, cook up some breakfast, eat it, take a nap. The defense is going to give him that every game. They are just letting him shoot that. He can take all the time in the world he wants because that's kind of, it's like we were talking about with the Hack-a-Shack thing. It's like, all right, well, what's the best outcome? Well, it's a free throw. It's a really valuable look to just sending him to the line. All right, well, the best defense against Giannis is to concede a 45% jump shot. It's not really a good thing for the defense still, all things considered. But I do have KD 1 spot above him at number 4, and I completely agree with you with the point that you made about Kevin Durant's limitations. I think his floor is lower than Giannis's at this point. But because, we've seen it. It's not just Aaron Gordon, right? McDaniels in the playoffs, right? In that Minnesota series. I think KD can struggle with physicality more than a lot of other guys on this list, but I would go to KD. I would defer to KD in a big game spot when I needed a tough look over Giannis.
But how about over 48 minutes? Who's the better scorer over 48 minutes? It's Giannis, right? It's got to be Giannis.
I don't know, man. KD brings me a supreme perimeter value too, complimenting. And Giannis has a great complementary scoring skill set too with how he just can get to the rim. But KD's clutch, man. KD's clutch. KD's also one hell of a transition scorer too, dude. He's
certainly not Giannis level. KD absolutely is clutch. There's no denying that. In fact, I don't think that's a conversation. Who's the better clutch shot maker? Obviously, it's Kevin freaking Durant.
That was the deciding factor for me, man. This was the toughest decision I think I had on this list, man.
I think this version of Giannis has not only a significantly higher floor, I also think he has the higher ceiling, right? We saw him go off for 58 earlier this year, and we are watching good half-court defenses right now that just can't guard him, right? The Magic are trying to load up the paint. They've got big front court personnel, and they still can't guard him in the half court. That's a version of Giannis we've never seen before.
That is what I was going to say. I think there are more guys in a defensive archetype in the league today that can match up against Kevin Durant. There's way more of those guys that can match up with Giannis individually, and that's a good argument.
And to me, this isn't the Giannis that we saw in 2023, right, when he really just was a brutal watch in terms of half-court skill, and he couldn't make his free throws against the Heat, even though he did have 38 points in that game. It was a meltdown down the stretch. He's so much more skilled right now, and he does have that touch shot making and some of that over-the-top shot making that has always been missing from his game, and he's just a superhero, man. He's gotten so much better this year, legitimately, at 30 years old, and I think it's incredible. I think the fact that both he and Jokic have gotten better this year just blows my mind because they're so far and away the 2 best players on the planet, and they're playing at such ridiculous levels.
I agree.
All right. So I have Giannis at 4. My number 5, I already know is not on your list. I have Joel Embiid here. What the hell do you do with Joel Embiid? For me, as much as health and availability is a huge red flag, the dude has suited up this season. He played in the postseason last year. It's not like Kawhi Leonard, where I think healthy Joel Embiid is a full-on myth. I think it's mostly a fantasy, but I'm still going to rank him on my list. The reason Embiid isn't higher, I'll start with, and this is something that I've been harping on for years. He is not somebody whose scoring skill set scales favorably to the playoffs. Part of that is the reliance on getting to the line. He still gets to the line at a good rate in the playoffs, but we have seen in some postseasons his free throw numbers drop a little bit per game. He's also specifically very reliant on his face-up jumpers, right, in some of his rhythm pull-ups, and those just have completely let him down in the postseason. The last 3 playoffs, he's averaged 0.75 points per jump shot. That's absolutely horrible. And so overall in the playoffs since 2022, he's under 26 points per game on 58% true shooting. It is impressive that with how critical we've all been of Embiid in the playoffs and how bad he's been by his standards, those are still the numbers. And he still does get to the line at such a high rate that like the efficiency ends up being better than the raw field goal percentage or the effective field goal percentage would suggest. And last year was the best he's been in the playoffs as a jump shooter. It was the best he's been in the regular season as a jump shooter too, but he did it in the playoffs coming off of the meniscus injury with the Bell's palsy, right? Like legitimately banged up, tough circumstances, and he still was able to give you, I think it was 33 a night in that series on solid efficiency. So I have my concerns about him in the postseason on top of the concerns about his scoring arsenal that I mentioned. One thing that's always limited him as a playoff player is his playmaking, where you see most of these years he has a negative assist to turnover ratio. That's a problem with playoff Embiid, but that's not really a scoring thing. I mean, that's more of an overall offensive limitation of his. And in the last 2 regular seasons, man, this guy's giving you almost 34 points per game on 65% true shooting. Like, I don't trust him as much as I do the top 4. I think that they're all better shot makers. I think that they're more versatile. I think that they've held up significantly better in these playoff environments. I'm going to give all of them the edge over Embiid. And Giannis has had his issues in some playoff spots historically, but with this newfound skill of his, I have more faith in him. I trust him more than Embiid in terms of scaling to the postseason. But I just cannot deny Joel Embiid's ceiling versus everybody below him. KD's the only one who I even considered because he's Kevin Durant, but like, I hate to even say it because I'm so fed up with Embiid in so many ways, but like, he has the ability to destroy everybody in a way that nobody below him does, because we've seen it in the regular seasons, and he's just so overwhelming. He's so hard to guard when he's right. Like, a vast majority of NBA teams cannot guard him without fouling. And when that jumper is falling, it's just an automatic source of really good offense for him. He's almost impossible to guard out of the post, out of isolation. He has his moments where he's really effective as a popper. I'm not the highest on Embiid. I've never been the highest on Embiid. I'm never going to be the highest on Embiid, but I still think he's too dominant when he's right for me to have him any lower than number 5 on this list.
I understand that. Outside of his injuries and why I omitted him from my list, because that's obviously the biggest reason, is because I just don't trust Embiid to be available in important situations or available at all, right? It's always seemingly a flip of a coin. And unfortunately, I think that might plague Embiid for the rest of his career, right? Yeah. We keep talking about Kawhi Leonard and his knee inflammation. That seems to be what's plaguing an Embiid. And if history shows us anything, it's that this is going to be a thing that's just going to linger over Embiid's head, likely until he retires, you know? And so that's a large component of it. Another large component is what you mentioned with his on-ball scoring skill set, how reliant he is on the face-up jumper. Well, what put the nail in the coffin for me was Embiid's off-ball value. And it's not like it's zero, right? Embiid is a really good role man. He's excellent in the two-man game when you can involve him with a guy like Tyrese Maxey, right? But it is a lot of Embiid standing around in ways that, right, Booker's moving and KD's moving and these guys are getting to their looks, right? Embiid's really stagnant. And there are just a lot of games where you watch Philadelphia and if the ball isn't in his hands, just kind of standing over there by himself. And that was the nail in the coffin for why I don't have Embiid on this list. I think that's the tertiary concern to my other big concerns, which is the face-up jumper failing and the injury concerns. But that is another concern of mine with Embiid, where I don't have it with other guys. And I just don't trust Joel Embiid. I'm done with him. He is officially in a category alone with Kawhi Leonard and with Zion Williamson, where I just don't know if you're going to be able to go on game day, and that's important to me.
The place, the dungeon.
Yeah, dude, the no man's land. The sunken place is a good way to put it.
Thanks, man. I just came up with that off the top of my head. I'm a genius. All right, let's move into the top 3. Who's in your 3 spot, Logan?
I've got Luka Doncic, and Luka to me has the highest ceiling, I think, of any scorer on this list, with the ease at which he can hunt and get to all his looks, with how he can dominate and take over a game with his pull-up three-point shooting. Luka's also just a killer. Luka has that madman ability where he can crank it up another level in the playoffs if he really gets emotionally involved. But I also think Luka, in a lot of ways, can shoot you out of games and can settle for those pull-up jumpers. And it's really hard to gauge. I played with Luka as low as number 4 on this list, but as high as number 2, and I settled in the middle here at number 3. Luka's third in pull-up points per game. This has been a down year for him efficiency-wise. He's only shooting 45% from the field, 34% from deep, and 56.5% true shooting. He's shooting 35% on pull-up jumpers and 33% on pull-up threes. And I expect him to be way more efficient in the playoffs. And it is those physical abilities that when you look at a playoff environment, like Luka's so freaking strong. He can just get to that elbow jumper, or he can get on the low block and hunt looks when he wants to. It's just, is he going to on a game-to-game basis? And we saw that in Boston where, it was a roller coaster ride with Luka. He'd have a great series, and then he'd have an ass series, and then he'd have a great series, and then he'd have an ass series. And that's why I couldn't put him over SGA. I know what I'm getting every single game with SGA. I know SGA is going to hunt his looks. He's going to get to them efficiently. He's not going to take bad, dumb shots. He's not going to take the offense out of rhythm. And I think most importantly, he's not going to shoot you out of a basketball game. So while I think Luka may have a higher ceiling than any other scorer on this list, arguably, SGA and Jokic to me just have higher floors. And that's why I prefer them to Luka. And that's why he's at number 3. I know what Luka can do in a playoff setting. And in a lot of ways, Luka scares me almost more than any other scorer on this list than Jokic. But I know what bad comes with Luka, and unfortunately I have to balance that out. And that's why I can't have Luka any higher than number 3 right now.
I have Luka at number 3 as well. I think it is extremely close between him and SGA. I mean, I would have no issue with anybody having either one of them above the other. This hasn't been the best season from Luka, right? He's under 28 a night on 57% true shooting, slightly below that even. But last regular season, he gave you almost 34 points per game on close to 62% true shooting. It was one of the great scoring regular seasons that we've seen. He also wasn't his best in the playoffs last year. I know that they went to the finals, but I think that Luka did get a little bit overhyped in that run when people started declaring he was the best player in the world, because there was a little bit of conflating the team's success with what he was doing individually. Like, by Luka's standards, that was up there for his worst offensive playoff run that we've seen, or really overall in terms of individual performance, because he struggled so much against the Clippers and he was so bad against the Celtics. So overall in that run, he ends up at 29 a game on 55.5% true shooting. He was banged up, of course, have to mention that. But he also just went cold as a jump shooter at various stretches in that Clippers series early on against the Thunder before he got hot in the NBA Finals against the Celtics. And that is an important component in this conversation. The volatility that does come with Luka's reliance on the pull-up three specifically, because last year in the regular season, it was the best he's ever been as a three-point shooter, and it added another truly lethal dimension to his game, where ironically in years past, he wasn't a great three-point shooter in the regular season, but then he would just have these unbelievable shooting displays in the playoffs from beyond the arc, right? You think about the Clippers series back in the day, 2020 and 2021, last year was the best in terms of regular season. He's over 38% from three, over 52% effective field goal percentage on pull-up jumpers. But then in the playoffs, it was more erratic. He was under 47% effective field goal percentage, which is not a particularly good number. This regular season, he's under 45% effective field goal percentage on pull-up jumpers, which is a pretty bad number for a high-volume pull-up shooter. So that's the duality with him versus SGA, right? I do think that Luka has the higher ceiling because of the volume of those pull-up threes, because when they are falling at an elite clip, well, he can explode for 70 on you, right? I mean, he can just completely dominate games with volume scoring in a way that I don't think anybody else in the league can. And obviously, he's not just like a total boom or bust based on the pull-up three, because he is also so strong, and he does have a very complete scoring arsenal. I thought that he was excellent from the mid-range in the playoffs last year, and I think he's a really good mid-range shooter in general, and we know that, like, he can bully you out of the post when he wants to. He is just about as good from floater range as anybody in the sport. He shoots 49% inside the paint, outside the restricted area this season. So he has advantages compared to SGA, absolutely. He is stronger. That's a big thing when it comes to the postseason, right? Your ability to impose yourself physically does matter. Now, SGA is an exception in the sense that he gets to the spot on the floor that oftentimes is like sort of reserved for the really strong guys, right? You think it's the strong Kawhi Leonard, it's the strong Luka Doncic, it's the strong Jokic who can just will their way to that sort of short mid-range. SGA does it with his ability to change pace and shift gears, and he's just unbelievably good from that range. But I still think strength is a meaningful advantage for Luka, and the ceiling that he does have in any game is his advantage. But SGA is just so consistently dominant in that uber important area that I was just talking about, that we talked about with Brunson, right? When you get to the playoffs, it's about consistently getting to shots that are good enough that you can make at a good clip. And the shots that nobody can ever take away are the shots from the short mid-range, right? If you're an incredible touch shot maker, anywhere from like 8 to 15, 16 feet, if you can live there and consistently be efficient, I just have the utmost faith in you. Think about what SGA did against Dallas last year, where they are consistently loading up the paint and they're helping hard on all of his elbow drives and they're roaming off of shooters, the bigs are, and SGA was still able to carve them up super efficiently with good volume because you can't take away that sort of shot making. That's what we've seen him do for a couple years now, and I just believe in that so deeply. So I am going to favor the higher individual floor with SGA compared to Luka.
Well said. I completely agree across the board. That's why SGA is higher to me. He's more reliable. Like I said, I know what I'm getting. Right now, he's giving you 30 points per game on 63% true shooting. He's number 2 in isolation points per game with 8. He's number 3 in pick and roll points per game with 10.3. And he's number 4 in points per game off pull-ups with 11.5. It's a rock-solid shot diet. And Shai is as rock solid as they come. I know what I'm getting with him. I know he's going to hunt and get to his looks. That's not something that I have to worry about with SGA, and that is why I prefer him. So I let you sum that up really well, man. I think the only criticism that you could have with either of these guys is they don't have super high complementary skill sets, right?
Definitely.
These are guys that basically derive all of their offensive value from having the ball in their hands. But when you're this great on ball, it doesn't really matter to me.
And the other thing that I do want to add with SGA is I don't want to make it sound like he's somebody who solely lives on that mid-range shot diet, right? Because that would be a problem. He's also second among all guards in restricted area makes, and he finishes in the restricted area at a 73% clip. And he's fifth in the paint, non-restricted area makes. He shoots over 50% there, and he's second in mid-range makes, and he shoots 49% there. All those ranks are among guards. So he dominates that entire paint in short mid-range area because he does get to the rim as effectively as any guard in basketball. I mean, that's why this dude has more 30-point games than anybody in the sport since last season. He has more 25-point games than anybody in the sport since last season. Like, you'll see the memes about, oh, can't score 40, man. But the consistency is completely unmatched. And he's so efficient on ball. 85th percentile pick and roll scorer, 85th percentile isolation scorer. We're now looking at 3 seasons where SGA is averaging almost 31 points per game overall on 63% true shooting. And again, I thought that his scoring in last year's playoffs scaled significantly better than Luka's. And he averaged over 30 a night on better than 58% true shooting because he has that super dependable shot making and shot diet. And now this year, you have the added 3-point volume from SGA where he's taking more than 6 threes a night. And I do have mixed feelings about that because there are certain games where it's just like, Shai, you're shooting 90% inside the arc but you're like 1 of 10 on threes, right? I mean, this happened a few games ago. This happened in the Warriors game that I went to. Like, if you defensively are able to get Shai to be taking 8 to 10 pull-up threes and he's cold, like, that's a big win for you. That's a big win because he's so great inside the arc. But I think overall, it's another weapon that he has in his quiver, so to speak. The fact that, look at what he just did to Dallas, right? Where he goes 5 of 9 on pull-up threes. Like, he's capable of more explosive performances there, and I do have faith in him striking the right balance, not overdoing it with the pull-up shooting from deep. And I don't think that he has. I think 6 attempts a game is fine for him, and I do think that he'll shoot, at about a 35% clip on those attempts, and I just think it makes him an even more versatile, even more complete scorer. So overall, I think it's a slight net positive that he has added a little bit more of the volume 3-point shooting to his game, because you're pairing that with a guard who shoots 59% on twos, Logan. He is on pace to become the first ever guard to score 30 points per game in a season while shooting 59% or better inside the arc. I just want his consistency in a postseason, and that's what I'm going to take.
It's ridiculous, man. And I think for SGA and Jokic both, and this isn't a disrespectful shot at Luka, I think they're harder guys to guard. I think the archetype is harder to find to guard guys like that because of SGA's change in pace and because he can kill you from every single level, right? Like, Luka's super strong, but I think a guy like Lu Dort matches up really well with him, right? And Lu Dort's an outlier because he's one of the best perimeter defenders on the planet, and he has such a strong base, and he's such a strong guy. But I think there are more guys like that where SGA, with his change in pace, just hard to stay in front of.
Incredibly hard to stay in front of. I don't know if I totally agree. I mean, I think it's incredibly difficult to find an archetype who can guard either one of them. And as good as Lou has been on Luka, I do think we also have to acknowledge that, like, in that head-to-head matchup, they've blitzed the shit out of him. They've done everything they can to force the ball out of Luka's hands.
And Dallas also had to do that against SGA. I agree. Luka can serve buckets to anybody, right? Like,
it's a great point, though. I mean, SGA was in his sort of nightmare offensive situation with how the guys around him were shooting and how Dallas was guarding him and guarding them as a team. And even as everybody else around him struggled, SGA was amazing as a scorer in that series.
Still got his. And
Absolutely.
I think that also applies to Jokic too, right? There are guys that can physically match up with Jokic, but there's no one on the planet who can guard him. Nobody. You can't point to anybody in the league. The best defender on the planet. That's crazy. And it's just a total package. Like, on the low block, you can go to him, and he's the strongest guy in the league, and he's got impeccable footwork. He's got the best touch in the league of anybody. And with that, right, the only criticism that you could have had about Jokic last year was the three-point shooting. What's your argument now? He's shooting 50% from deep. He's giving you 32 a night on 65% true shooting. He's efficient basically across all play types. He's the best scoring post-up man in the league in terms of volume. And he does have a complementary skill set, too, where he can thrive alongside other guys as a role guy. And that's the big distinction to me between a Luka and an SGA, is that Jokic does have that value. And I'll be clear about something. I don't think it's close. Because of how strong and how great his touch is and the footwork, I think he's better as an individual scorer than either of those guys and how he can initiate from the perimeter. But when you combine that with the fact that he does have this complementary skill set that could coexist, right? Russell Westbrook is thriving alongside with Jokic as his second guy, right? When they're on the floor together. And that, to me, just puts Jokic over the top and on a completely different level where we can talk about him in these historical contexts. I know you've been saying for a long time that he's the greatest offensive player and ever, right? And we've seen a friend of the show, I saw Jason of Hoops Tonight say that he thought that Jokic was slowly becoming the greatest offensive player of all time. It is becoming a little bit ridiculous. And, right, we've been singing his praises for a while. I'll be honest with you guys. I've frankly been really upset with myself since we did the Top 10 Peaks episode that I didn't have Jokic on my list. I had a dream. I told you, Carson.
Yeah.
I had a dream where I was like Jokic's protege or something, man. I think it was my subconscious eating away at me, and it manifested
I almost had a
itself.
sexual dream about Nikola Jokic.
Man, I don't believe that. I think you're capping.
Well, I'm speaking my truth, and you're not making me feel hurt. But anyways, yes, I'm glad that you've had a revelation because I thought that was a little bit crazy that you didn't have.
We
Jokic
should do
in
an
your top 10
entire
peaks.
podcast episode on that, Carson.
On our top 10 peaks. No, we just did that.
Oh no, I was saying your sexual dream about Nicole.
Oh,
Melly.
it's something I'd rather not talk about in public. Thank you.
Okay, I thought we could just explore that further.
No, thank you. It's already been explored with my
Okay.
therapist quite intensely. Is there anything else you want to say about Jokic's scoring? He bucket?
There's no holes. He's unstoppable. There's no answer to Jokic, bro. Like, he's the GOAT!
Glaze, 15 yards for glazing. I've been saying Jokic is the best scorer in basketball for a few years. And historically, that's a take that's gotten a lot of blowback because he hasn't had the regular season volume. But my contention has always been regular season volume is not the best indicator of a truly elite scorer. To me, it's who is the hardest to stop when they want to score. And that's been Nikola Jokic for several years. Who is the best in the postseason, right? Where we truly judge your mettle. Who can get to their spots at will and who can be hyper efficient and score with elite volume in those environments. That's always been Nikola Jokic. So that's why he's been my answer. But now I think it's starting to become much more of the consensus that he's the best scorer in basketball, because I put out a poll on my Twitter a few days ago and like 75% of people agreed that he was, whereas last year, I think maybe after we did our top 10 scorers episode last season, I put out a poll on YouTube and it was like 11% of people who said that Jokic was the best scorer. So I get it, man. When you see a guy go out there and he's averaging 32.3 on 65% true shooting, as Jokic is doing this year, if that's what moves the needle for you, I understand it. And the big development this year has just been the absolutely elite jump shooting. Nikola Jokic is averaging 1.35 points per jump shot right now. That is a better number, actually a significantly better number than 2016 Steph Curry. It is absolutely unfathomable. And the even crazier stat, he's shooting 50% from deep, right? But he also puts up more heaves than anybody in basketball. He doesn't care, right? At the end of a quarter, he's always going to be the one who's shot putting it from 80 feet. If you take away his heaves this season, he's shooting almost 55% on actual three-point attempts, like just normal half-court three-point attempts. It's absolutely absurd. And so he's averaging 1.3 points per spot up, which is ridiculous. He's averaging almost 1.5 points per roll. That includes pops, where he has just been absurd. And you mentioned the two-man game with Russ. Right now, I think he and Russ have a better two-man game than him and Jamal, because I think that Russ does a better job of getting downhill, and I think Russ does a significantly better job of finding him with those pocket passes, and Jamal has just missed him as a popper so many times this year to instead put up like a really tough mid-range pull-up. Jamal Murray has got to get it figured out, man. But Jokic is doing everything he possibly can to cover up for Jamal's shortcomings. I mean, for God's sakes, Jokic has 104 points over the last two games. So I think he does have phenomenal versatility with what he does as a jump shooter, right? I mean, he's one of the smartest cutting bigs in basketball just in terms of the give and go, right? And you'll see the Nuggets run Iverson cuts for him, and his touch finishing is so phenomenal whenever he catches the ball within 10 feet of the rim off of a cut. And he moves without the ball well, right? You see him curling around screens as a jump shooter as well. He does all this stuff. He's averaging, I already said that, but almost 1.5 points per roll. I mean, that is just an absolutely comical number. So it is an incredibly well-rounded skill set. He's been super effective as a pick and roll ball handler, running inverted pick and roll scores with 71st percentile efficiency. But simply put, bottom line, the reason that he is number one for me is because of the fact that at will, he just gets to a more efficient shot than anybody else can in basketball, specifically out of the post. A Nikola Jokic post-up is, to me, the most unguardable play type in NBA history. And the crazy thing is, this year, as he's scoring over 32 points per game on 65% true shooting, he hasn't had his normal otherworldly touch. I mean, he's still been phenomenal, but he's shooting 65% in the restricted area, 55% in the paint outside the restricted area. That's a great number, but that's compared to 62% inside the paint outside the restricted area last year, which is much more normal for him, and 72% inside the restricted area last year. So those are numbers that he's sustained for years, and there's no reason to think he won't bounce back to them. And while I do think he's due for some regression as a jump shooter, I think he's due for as much, if not more, positive regression as a touch shot maker. So I think that he can maintain this volume and efficiency as long as he wants to, and nobody's been better in the playoffs. Nobody has matched his combination of volume and efficiency. Since 2021 in the postseason, he averages 30 points per game on 62% true shooting. The only guy who can approach that volume is Luka, and he doesn't have nearly that sort of playoff efficiency. Jokic is built to thrive there because he is so unbelievably strong and because he dominates that key area that we've been talking about for so long that nobody can take away. That range inside the paint, outside the restricted area, short, mid-range, all of that. He's just unstoppable. And when he's aggressive, as he always has been in the playoffs, and as he has been more than ever before in this regular season, he unequivocally has the highest floor as a scorer in the NBA. He's also the guy I want most in the clutch. I mean, we've seen that this year, right? Where if you can get him on an island, on a post-up, again, these are 65% shots for him. They are automatic. Nobody else can just will themselves to that one-on-one in the NBA. Completely unstoppable, completely unguardable. I actually think he's pretty clearly the best scorer in the NBA when you consider all of the factors, right? Situationally, versatility, volume, efficiency, scaling to the playoffs especially, and just having the most unstoppable route to buckets in the NBA. I understand it's not everybody's favorite to watch.
How could it
but I don't
not
think you
be?
can deny it.
How could it not be, man? How could you
I
not
love
enjoy
watching it.
watching
Well,
Jokic play ball?
Real quick, who's your favorite scorer to watch?
Probably
Pure scorer.
Shai. Probably
Yeah, Shai's
Shai.
my favorite too. Shai's an artist. But I do love watching
But
Jokic as a
Shai
scorer.
also plays basketball like a ballerina, man. He is
Literally.
He's a gazelle.
The body control is unbelievable. And the number of counters, that's another thing with Shai, right? You look at the play types, and he's very ball dominant with the pick and roll and the isolation, but the number of things that he can do, right? The ability to spin, the ability to use his pivot foot, right? The ability to use fakes. He just is a master of creating slivers of separation in so many different ways. And Jokic is too. It's different. But again, when you talk about, mastery of the footwork aspect of it, the fakes, nobody is better than Jokic out of the post at that. On top of the fact that nobody is close to his touch in NBA history.
And it's everywhere on the court too, right? It's just elegant. And the thing too is it's not just aesthetically pleasing, but it's how effective it is, right? Because when you're thinking about most aesthetically pleasing scorers, right? You might go to a Kobe or a DeMar DeRozan, right? Those guys are butter smooth to watch. And I'm not denigrating either of those guys' games by making this comp, but Shai does it in a way that legitimately creates space and creates just elite shot quality and looks in a different way, in my opinion. It's not just pretty, but it's really effective too. I think also up there, I'd have to have Steph. A Steph heater is kind of just uniquely unlike anything else. I'd also say Jalen Brunson. I think Jalen Brunson plays such a beautiful brand of basketball, the way he hunts downhill. It just makes me I feel like a proud dad watching Jalen Brunson play, man.
You feel like Rick.
Yeah, I feel like
Brunson.
I feel like Rick Brunson.
KD, you got to have KD in there for pretty.
KD's a good shout. Those are the top. Those are the upper echelon to me. The only thing I was going to add, you hit it, though, on Jokic. The clutch aspect is the fact that late in games, if you're trailing, it doesn't matter, right? Say there's 4 minutes left in a game and you're down 10, the Nuggets are going to dump the ball to Jokic on the low block every single possession until he wills them back into the basketball game. And we've seen it this year. It's remarkable, and it's unstoppable. There's nothing that the defense can do to stop it. So, yeah. But are there any other shouts for favorite scorers to watch? Any guys that I didn't mention?
I actually really like watching Cat, which is maybe a little bit controversial. I love watching Book. I've always loved watching Book. The one more thing I'll add with Jokic is his raw true shooting percentage doesn't even tell the full story of how efficient he is, because as we've talked about before, nobody is better at rebounding their own misses. Close to, it's between 15 and 20%, I believe, of Jokic's own misses, he rebounds and then puts back up right
Yeah.
away. So add a few points to that true
He's-
shooting percentage, and then you're in just completely unrivaled historical territory.
He's also top 5 in putback points per game this year, too.
Yeah.
Top 5 in cutting points per game. It's
And so many of those putbacks are off his own misses, which means effectively the first miss doesn't matter at all, right? It's one possession, the same guy shot and scored.
Yeah,
It's
tell
one
that to the
scoring
Angel
attempt.
Reese haters, man. I swear.
I mean, listen, man, if you score the putback, then what do you care about the miss?
That's
Nothing
why
happens.
Andre Drummond's the GOAT, man. I swear.
Logan, I feel like you're missing the part where I say score off the putback. You have to actually score off the putback. Andre Drummond would just miss 4 times and then put up a 3 that misses by 8 feet. I feel like we've basically covered it all with the Jokic glaze. Is there anything else that I wanted to say? I think we got it. He's also getting the line a little bit more this year, but he's also putting up more shots than ever. He's just been more aggressive than ever. You can't deny that level of physical bully ball with that level of skill and that level of touch. That, to me, is what makes Jokic one of the greatest scorers of all time, man. I mean, legitimately, that's an interesting conversation to have, but, like, how many dudes in NBA history are just tougher to stop from getting a bucket than Jokic? Not many.
Shaq, maybe? Wilt?
Yeah.
But, like, Shaq even doesn't
I
have
wouldn't
it
say that
on...
Shaq is a better scorer than Jokic.
Yeah, I
though.
agree, though, because, I mean, even Shaq, like, he can't do it from everywhere on the floor. Jokic
The
can.
versatility. Yeah, the versatility is the difference maker.
I mean,
there,
MJ
man.
probably, right?
Oh, absolutely MJ. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. But I don't think that there's many scoring peaks higher. You know, Kareem, I would say, is a higher scoring peak. It's a pretty short list. LeBron,
Jerry Stackhouse.
maybe. Oh, well, you got to have Jerry Stackhouse, of course. All right. Any more honorable mentions? Anybody who we didn't give a shout to that you want to show a little bit of love?
Yeah, so Kyrie and Steph, I think, were my 2 toughest cuts.
Kyrie above Steph? No, he fell for it. He's a flat earther. He fell for the handle. No.
Yeah, the aesthetics might have gotten me there. And then I didn't have as much trouble leaving this guy off with his offensive inconsistencies, but I do think he deserves an honorable mention with how he's been playing this year, and that's Anthony Davis.
Yeah.
Davis is at 28 points per game on 61% true shooting, and over the last 2 seasons, he's never been more consistent than he ever has been before. And so, you know, I thought long and hard, and even though he's been more consistent, everybody basically above him, I just trust more. Where, you know, AD's touch could be off on a game, and he's not hitting as much of those over-the-shoulder fadeaways, right? Or he's not imposing himself as much as I'd like, and that's the only reason he was off. But Davis, I don't nearly worry about that as much as I would have, 3 or 4 years ago. I think this is a different Anthony Davis, and he's also been way more available. I think Anthony Davis has played 95% of games over the last 2 years, like something ridiculous like that. So, AD wasn't as tough as a cut as the other guys, but I do think he deserves a shout.
AD was a tough cut for me, too. I mean, especially got off to such an unbelievable start to the year offensively. And even though he got into a little bit of a slump, he's had a monster performance since then. I mean, the loss to Atlanta, he was pretty crazy. At the end of the day, though, I don't think AD is a better scorer than Cat. And I was like, if Cat's not going to be on my list, I don't think I can have AD on my list. Cat is an unreal scorer, man. He's an unbelievable scorer. Isolation, post up, shooting almost 45% from 3 this year. Trailer and transition. You name it, man. As a scorer, Cat can pretty much do it.
Inverse pick and roll, man.
There ultimately were just perimeter players who I felt were probably a little bit more valuable as scorers overall than Cat, who could create more for themselves. And so that's where I did give a slight edge to Donovan Mitchell. And he was probably my toughest cut, but Cat was right up there. And still on the outskirts of this conversation, I will say, I considered LeBron. He didn't make a very compelling case to me, but what we've seen from him, like just in the playoffs, even just last year, or down the stretch of last year, I think he's taken a bit of a step back, but I'm also not going to just totally write him off and say he doesn't belong anywhere near these conversations. One more Jokic glaze. there's one more thing that I wanted to say. The economy of the touches, Logan. He touches the ball a million times per game, but he's so efficient with every touch, not just in terms of his literal scoring efficiency, but also in terms of how purposeful, how intentional every touch is, the decisiveness, right? I mean, the ball's not going to stick with him, and if it does, it's probably going to be a back down where he's either going to draw a second defender or he's just going to score easily if they don't send help. So there you go, last Jokic glaze of the day. But how can you not, man, with what he's doing? And I just want to say, I think we're in for an amazing, amazing MVP race this year, which has just become the norm in recent seasons. But with what Jokic is doing, with what Giannis is doing, and with what SGA is doing on an amazing team, like, I don't think you can dismiss SGA in this race. I understand that individually he hasn't been as dominant as the other two, but like if we look at the historical standard, when you're on the 1 seed, when you're on by far the best team, and you've been a top 3 player in basketball this season like SGA has been, you at least have to be in the conversation. And I've seen that conversation start to pick up, and he belongs in there. Jokic and Giannis have definitely been the 2 best players, but SGA has also been unbelievable. There you have it, folks. A little bit of insight into my thoughts on the early season MVP race and all of our thoughts on the top 10 scorers in basketball. Did not talk about Bill Belichick becoming the UNC football coach, but Logan made a TikTok about that. So if you want more of our thoughts on all sorts of topics, and if you want to see our trivia content, our short form trivia videos, follow us across social media, TikTok and Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh. It's all there, along with graphics and clips from the show. Also, if you want more of our analysis, I just did a video yesterday on Jaren Jackson Jr. and the incredible season that he's been having on our YouTube channel. So we don't just have our full shows here. We have our film breakdowns on the NBA and NFL that you can find, and you can listen to all of our full shows across all audio platforms. You can also join our Discord if you want. The link to that is at the link tree across our social media bios, and you can check out our merch if you want. That is at breakingt.com. It's also linked in our link tree. Big weekend of football coming, Logan. Give me your gut feeling for Steelers, Eagles, and Bills, Lions, and then we'll get out of here for real.
My hottest take is that Jameis Winston upsets the Chiefs in a snowy game. He just cranks it up and goes dumb on Kansas City. That's my trap game of the year, Cleveland against Kansas City, especially if it snows, because, I don't know, man, Jameis is going to get all riled up. He's going to get that Christmas spirit in him, and he's going to get the spirit of St. Nick going. It's over for Kansas City. Who did the Bills got? Bills, Lions.
Yeah.
Close game. Josh Allen keeps it close. I think Monty and Gibbs probably run all over the Bills defense. I think they're like 26th in rushing yards per attempt defensively this year. So give me Detroit. I'll say I think it's a bit of a shootout. I'll go 31-27, something like that. And then I'm going to take Pittsburgh over Philly. I'll say 20-17.
Wow. That's crazy. I'm going to go Philly over Pittsburgh by that exact same score, though. I think that is a defensive dogfight. And I don't know. I can definitely see a world in which Hurts can't lead the drive that he needs to, and Pittsburgh takes that one.
There's just some general...
I do think Philly has more offensive talent.
There's just some general dysfunction that I don't like with Philly, that drama that's going on.
The drama, yeah. Oh, the drama, sure. I already said this on the end of our Sunday show, but I'm taking the Lions 38-35. I understand that's a comically high score to predict.
Damn, yeah, I thought I was
reasonable with these two offenses.
Damn, I thought I was going high.
I am expecting almost no stops. I think the Lions are going to run the ball down the Bills' throats. I think that Josh is going to get what he wants offensively, but I just think it's a little bit of an easier formula for Detroit because I think they're going to be so dominant in the trenches against a Bills run defense that has not been good. Would absolutely love for it to go the other way. But also I think if one team is going to blow the other out, I think it's much more likely that it's Detroit, who is just so physically dominant that they pull away. If it comes down to clutch drive versus clutch drive, like I trust Josh more.
For sure.
Detroit's a really great team. I think they're the best team in football, so I'll take them to win a shootout. Now we're done for real. Bet you didn't expect that little treat. That's our little NerdSesh advent calendar. A little treat for you guys before you go. And with that, as always, I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was NerdSesh.